Hi friends, welcome to Creative DIY Purpose. Thank you for stopping by today. Project number 1 is a handmade wooden cutting board that I picked up at a yard sale for $1. And we're going to turn it into beautiful fall decor. But first, I'd like to invite you over to Facebook. I just started a new group page for us over there. Be sure to head over, share some of your creations, your thrifted finds, your DIY projects, and get some behind the scenes of Creative DIY Purpose. And you can also follow me on Pinterest, Instagram, and over in our community tab here on YouTube. The cutting board did have a lot of knife marks in the middle, and one side was really discolored. And since I wasn't sure what had been done to it previously, I thought it was best just to turn it into a decorative board. So I used some of the multi-purpose folk art paint, and I really like that. I sanded it back down to distress it with some 220 fine grit sandpaper, and it is so super smooth. I decided to put a saying on the front. We're going to go old school today and break out the carbon paper. I went over to canva.com, typed out the saying, "Hello Pumpkin," even though I originally thought that this was an apple and was going to write "Hello Autumn," and I grabbed the wrong sign, but that's okay. We're just going to roll with this. I'm cutting the carbon paper down to size, and that'll help so I don't get any unwanted carbon paper on the other parts. I do recommend using frog tape to hold it down. I used Scotch tape and did pull back some of the paint. Once it's taped down, you can go over the letters with a pencil. Don't want my lettering super dark, so that's why I went lighter with the pressure. I am going to try to fill in those letters where they're wider just by kind of scribbling inside of the lines. If you do happen to get any unwanted carbon marks on your surface, a lot of times they can just erase off, or you could take some fine grit sandpaper if you have some stubborn marks. Another nice thing about the carbon paper, you don't have to be stuck with dark gray or black lettering. If you use very light pressure, you can then go over them with colored pencils, colored paint markers, or even a thin paintbrush with some of your favorite paint. After I had that step done, I took it outside and gave it a really good coat of this acrylic spray sealer. It's a great sealer if you do any type of drawings or watercolor. The other side of the board, I used the 220 sandpaper, and I thought the grain of the wood was really beautiful. So for this side, I chose some DIY clear wax to seal it in. That way the board has a side for the fall and then a nice natural side for the rest of the year. I applied the clear wax and then wiped it back, then applied a second coat, letting it sit on there for a little bit, and then buffing that final coat to get a nice finished look. Next, I wrapped some jute twine around the stem, then adding a piece of vintage lace ribbon that I got a little Ziploc bag full of it at a thrift store for only $1 last week. I have a bunch of these shabby roses left over from when I used to make headbands and hair clips when I owned my brick and mortar children's shop. I'm adding some hot glue just to make it a touch smaller. And I glued on some Spanish moss, and then we're going to add this shabby rose. I made this tag and printed it out on cardstock, and I think it needs something else right in the middle, so I found this mustard color rose, and I love the color combination of that shade of green with the mustard color for fall. You have to tell me, what are your favorite colors this year for fall and fall decor, if you have any preference. For project number 2, we're going to give this 8x10 picture frame a new look. It's just a basic, outdated plastic frame. I applied one coat of the multi-surface acrylic white paint from Folk Art, and it's a titanium white, and that is good for most every surface, and I'm shocked at the coverage that you get from such an inexpensive paint. Now I'm going around the edges and dry brushing with some of the Apothecary from DIY Paint. My goal for this piece is to take one of the watercolor prints that I made on Canva and use those same colors and try to create a watercolored look for the frame. I decided to dry brush on some of the Waverly chalk paint in the color Moss, and then I took a damp paper towel and did some wet distressing around the edges, which brought out some of the black on the frame, as well as a little bit of the gold trim that was on the inside. Not too much, but just a touch. And then I took it outside, gave it a coat of the acrylic spray. I want to add more layers of paint on top, and I don't want the previous ones to rub off. Do the same process with some chestnut color paint from Apple Barrel and some copper paint from Folk Art. I kept adding paint where I felt that it needed it and then wiping it back to distress in other areas. And then to the final layer of paint, I did apply another coat of the acrylic paint. I did remove and clean the glass to the frame. I did not add it for the photos because it gives such a glare, but I can always add it to protect the print. Let me know if you have prints at home in a frame, do you prefer the glass on them or off when they're on display? Project number 3, I purchased these little pillar candlestick holders at a yard sale for 50 cents each. And while I like the antique look that they had on there, it needed a refresh. So I painted it with some of the multi-purpose Folk Art paint. Now I'm going over it with some DIY clear wax because I want to add some antiquing wax, but I definitely want to make sure that it doesn't turn out with that muddy, dirty look. And sometimes I tend to get a little heavy with the antique wax. So I did water it down quite a bit. I'm applying it on with a brush and then taking a piece of paper towel and using a blotting motion so that way the antique wax would stay where I wanted it. I decided that I would make something for fall to put on top of the pillars. I've got these pumpkins from the Dollar Tree, and I have some DIY paint and cake batter and a little bit of DIY paint and Apothecary. I checked, and the pumpkins I think are going to fit perfect. And then I also was thinking ahead for Christmas, they would look really cool with some bottle brush trees. So I ripped off the stem and I got a little carried away. So it was glued on and it took off some of the vinyl. There's a vinyl covering over these styrofoam pumpkins. So as I'm painting them, I realized that you can really see the middle mold line where they were put together. So I do end up doing a second coat with baking soda, and you can still see the line and some of the dents in them. What I'd recommend if you're going to do this is do 2 coats of the baking soda mixture. I did about 1 tablespoon of paint to 1 teaspoon of baking soda. I think it's going to really depend on the paint. If you have watery paint, so you may need a little bit more baking soda. But I applied the paint again all over the entire piece, and then what I did was dabbed the paint on in a stipple motion. And I think if I would have done that twice, it would have definitely covered up that line. So I applied some of the DIY clear wax to the pumpkins because I do want to add some of the watered down antique wax, and again, I just don't want it to be too dark. So I'm kind of patting the wax on to try to get it down into all of those little creases. Then I apply some of the watered down antiquing wax and just blot it off with a paper towel. And I'm sorry today for being so close down to the bottom of the screen. I must have been pushed far back on the table. I decided to take some of the antique wax and go right along that mold line and make the bottom of the pumpkin darker. I did take the original stems that came with these, and I did 3 things to them. I painted them with the white all-purpose paint. Now I'm adding some of the antique wax, and I'll wipe that back. And then I'm going to take a pair of clippers and clip off that top part, making the stems a little bit shorter. And honestly, I'd hesitated about using these. I didn't think that I would be able to get them where I like the look, and I thought that they turned out okay. For the next step, I took a little bit of Spanish moss and I twisted it real tight I find that that helps so it doesn't go all over the place. Then applying some of the hot glue to the base of it. I just did the very outer circle because I want the pumpkin to be able to sit evenly on the surface and not fall over. Next, I apply a generous amount of the hot glue and I push that stem right down into the styrofoam, hold it for a little bit because I don't want that popping back off. And I'm just taking off all the glue threads. I don't have video of it, but you can probably tell by looking at the top of the pumpkin. I did take a little bit of the DIY white wax and blot some on with a cloth, really paying attention to the creases to help bring out some of the texture and get some more shadowing. Next, I printed some tags out that I created over on Canva out on cardstock. I'm gonna punch some holes in them, add some string, and then this project was a wrap. Over on my blog in the fall printables post, I did add another set of printable tags for you guys. Next week, I have a newsletter coming out. If you're not signed up for that, you can sign up below in the description. I have some exciting news that I'll be sharing. And I'll be sharing another free fall printable for you that's going to be our vintage clock faces for fall. Friends, thank you so much for joining me today. Have a super blessed week. And I will see you again next Sunday.